the dark story of the Stanley Hotel, the haunted inspiration behind The Shining. The wind howls through the Colorado Rockies on a cold October evening in 1974. A lone car makes its way up the winding mountain road toward Estes Park, carrying a young writer and his wife. They are searching for something, though they do not yet know what. The man behind the wheel is struggling. His writing career has stalled, his family is facing financial difficulties, and a darkness has begun to take root in his mind. As the vehicle rounds the final bend, an enormous white building emerges from the mountain landscape like a ghost from another era. The Georgian colonial revival structure stands proudly against the darkening sky, its hundreds of windows watching the approaching visitors like countless unblinking eyes. This is the Stanley Hotel, and on this particular night, it will change the course of horror literature forever. But the story of the Stanley Hotel does not begin with Stephen King. It begins nearly a century earlier, with a man who was running from death itself. Freeland Oscar Stanley was born on June 20th, 1849, in the small town of Kingfield, Maine. From his earliest years, he demonstrated an extraordinary mechanical aptitude that would eventually reshape American transportation and industry. Along with his identical twin brother, Francis Edgar Stanley, he would grow up to become one of the most innovative inventors of the Gilded Age. The Stanley twins were virtually indistinguishable from one another, a fact they reportedly used to their advantage throughout their lives, sometimes switching places to confuse business associates and friends alike. The brothers first made their fortune not in automobiles, but in photography. In 1883, they developed a revolutionary dry photographic plate process that dramatically simplified the art of taking photographs. Their invention was so successful that it caught the attention of George Eastman, founder of the Eastman Kodak Company. In 1894, the Stanley brothers sold their photographic dry plate business to Kodak for a substantial sum, giving them the capital to pursue their next great obsession, the horseless carriage. At the turn of the 20th century, the automobile industry was still in its infancy, and inventors across the world were experimenting with different methods of propulsion. While some focused on gasoline engines and others on electric batteries, the Stanley brothers became convinced that steam was the future of transportation. They developed the Stanley Steamer, a steam-powered automobile that would become legendary for its speed, reliability, and elegant engineering. In 1906, a modified Stanley Steamer set a world land speed record of 127 miles per hour at Daytona Beach, Florida, a record that would stand for years. The Stanley Motor Carriage Company became one of the most successful automobile manufacturers in America, and F.O. Stanley, as he preferred to be called, became a wealthy man. But wealth and success could not protect him from the ravages of disease. In 1903, F.O. Stanley received devastating news. He had contracted tuberculosis, the same illness that had claimed countless lives throughout history. In that era, tuberculosis was often a death sentence. Doctors told Stanley that he had perhaps months to live, and they recommended that he travel west to Colorado, where the dry mountain air might ease his symptoms and extend his remaining time. It was not a cure they offered, merely a slightly longer path to the inevitable end. Stanley and his wife Flora packed their belongings and made the journey to the small mountain community of Estes Park, Colorado, nestled at an elevation of approximately 7,500 feet in the Rocky Mountains. The town was little more than a frontier settlement at the time, with a handful of rustic buildings and no real accommodations suitable for a wealthy industrialist. But something remarkable happened in those mountains. Instead of declining, Stanley's health began to improve. The clean mountain air, the low humidity, and the peaceful surroundings seemed to work a miracle on his ravaged lungs. Within months, the man who had been told he would die was riding horses through the mountain valleys and taking long walks through the wilderness. F.O. Stanley fell deeply in love with Estes Park. He saw in this remote mountain community not just a place of healing, but an opportunity. The wealthy and cultured members of Eastern society had no suitable place to stay when they visited the Rockies. There were no grand hotels, no sophisticated accommodations that could attract the elite travelers who might otherwise be drawn to this spectacular landscape. Stanley decided to build one himself. Construction on the Stanley Hotel began in 1907, and the project was an extraordinary undertaking by any measure. Every piece of material had to be transported up the mountain by horse-drawn wagon, as no roads suitable for automobiles yet existed. Stanley employed hundreds of workers, and spared no expense in creating a building that would rival the finest hotels in the world. The design was Georgian colonial revival, featuring a gleaming white exterior, red-roofed porticos, and elegant colonial-style architecture that seemed almost transported from the East Coast. The building was constructed with remarkable attention to detail, featuring handcrafted woodwork, imported fixtures, and every modern amenity available at the time. The Stanley Hotel officially opened its doors on July 4, 1909, and it immediately became one of the premier destinations in the American West. Guests arrived from across the country and around the world, drawn by the promise of luxury accommodations in an unspoiled mountain setting. The hotel featured its own power plant, providing electricity when many buildings in the region still relied on oil lamps. It had its own water and sewage systems, a fleet of Stanley steamer automobiles to transport guests from the train station, and a staff trained to provide impeccable service. Flora Stanley, F.O.'s beloved wife, was a talented pianist who had studied at the Boston Conservatory of Music. Her husband installed a magnificent Steinway grand piano in the hotel's music room, and Flora would often play for guests in the evenings. Her performances became legendary among the hotel's visitors, and the sound of her piano drifting through the corridors became synonymous with the Stanley Hotel experience. The music room and its piano would later become central to the hotel's reputation for supernatural activity. F.O. Stanley lived for decades beyond his dire tuberculosis diagnosis, finally passing away in 1940 at the age of 91. His wife Flora died in 1939. They had watched their beloved hotel grow and prosper through the roaring 20s, weather the Great Depression, and establish itself as one of the most iconic destinations in Colorado. But their deaths did not end their connection to the property. According to countless witnesses over the subsequent decades, the Stanleys never truly left. The first reports of supernatural activity at the Stanley Hotel date back to just a few years after F.O.'s death. Staff members began reporting strange occurrences: piano music playing in the middle of the night when the music room was empty, lights turning on and off by themselves, the sound of footsteps in vacant hallways. At first, these incidents were dismissed as the natural settling of an old building or the imaginative fears of night shift workers. But as the years passed and the reports accumulated, a pattern began to emerge. Something unusual was happening at the Stanley Hotel, something that defied rational explanation. The most famous haunted location in the hotel is room 217, located on the second floor. This room has a specific history that makes it unique among the hotel's guest accommodations. On June 25, 1911, a violent thunderstorm struck Estes Park. Lightning struck the Stanley Hotel, and the resulting electrical surge caused a catastrophic explosion in room 217. At that moment, a chambermaid named Elizabeth Wilson was inside the room, working her regular shift. The explosion was so powerful that it blew through the floor, sending Elizabeth plummeting into the room below. Remarkably, she survived the incident, though she suffered significant injuries, including 2 broken ankles. The hotel management provided for her care and recovery, and Elizabeth Wilson returned to work at the Stanley Hotel, where she remained a loyal employee until her death many years later. According to hotel lore, Elizabeth Wilson never truly left room 217. Guests who have stayed in the room report a wide variety of supernatural experiences. Luggage is mysteriously unpacked by unseen hands. Clothing is folded and put away in drawers. Lights turn on and off without explanation. Perhaps most famously, unmarried couples who stay in room 217 sometimes report feeling an invisible presence pushing them apart in bed, as if an old-fashioned housekeeper is disapproving of their improper arrangement. The ghost of Elizabeth Wilson, it seems, continues to perform her duties with the same dedication she showed in life, and she continues to enforce the moral standards of her era. But Elizabeth Wilson is far from the only spirit reported to haunt the Stanley Hotel. The 4th floor of the building, which originally served as quarters for the hotel staff, is said to be particularly active with paranormal phenomena. Guests and employees alike report hearing the sound of children laughing and running in the hallways, even when no children are present in the hotel. The explanation for this, according to local legend, involves the children of the hotel staff who lived on the 4th floor during the early decades of the hotel's operation. Whether these phantom children are actual ghosts or simply some kind of residual energy imprinted on the building remains a matter of debate among paranormal researchers. Room 401 has developed its own reputation for supernatural activity. Guests report objects moving by themselves, furniture being rearranged during the night, and an overwhelming sense of presence, as if someone is watching them. Some visitors have reported waking in the middle of the night to find the impression of a body on the bed beside them, as if someone has been lying there. Others have heard voices whispering in the darkness, speaking words that cannot quite be understood. The music room, where Flora Stanley once performed her elegant concerts, continues to echo with piano music according to numerous witnesses. Guests and staff members have reported hearing the distinctive sound of the Steinway piano playing in the middle of the night, only to discover upon investigation that the room is empty and the piano lid closed. Some have claimed to see a translucent figure seated at the piano, her hands moving gracefully across the keys before fading into nothingness. The ghost of Flora Stanley, these witnesses believe, continues to play for the guests of her husband's hotel, performing the concerts she loved so much in life. F.O. Stanley himself is said to appear in the billiard room, observing the activities of the hotel he built with his own fortune and determination. His apparition has been described as a well-dressed gentleman from another era, standing quietly in the corner of the room before vanishing when approached. In 1995, a guest photographed what appeared to be a translucent figure standing on the hotel's grand staircase, a figure that many believe to be F.O. Stanley himself, still watching over his creation more than half a century after his death. The MacGregor Ballroom, located on the top floor of the hotel, has its own share of supernatural legends. Named after Alexander MacGregor, a local rancher who was instrumental in the development of Estes Park, the ballroom is said to be haunted by multiple spirits. Guests have reported seeing figures in old-fashioned formal wear dancing across the empty floor, visible for only a moment before dissolving into the air. Others have heard the sound of orchestra music and the murmur of conversation, as if a grand party from a century ago continues to unfold in some dimension beyond ordinary perception. The hotel's ghost stories were well-established local lore by the time a struggling writer named Stephen King arrived on that fateful October evening in 1974. King was 37 years old, and while he had achieved some success with his debut novel Carrie, published earlier that year, he was far from the literary icon he would eventually become. He was traveling through Colorado with his wife Tabitha, and they found themselves in need of lodging near Estes Park. Someone suggested the Stanley Hotel, and they made their way up the mountain road as darkness fell. When the Kings arrived at the hotel, they discovered something that would prove crucial to the creative process that followed. The Stanley Hotel was closing for the season the very next day. Stephen and Tabitha King were literally the only guests in the entire building that night. The enormous hotel, with its hundreds of rooms and vast empty corridors, belonged to them alone. The staff were packing up, the furniture was being covered with sheets, and an unmistakable atmosphere of abandonment hung over the property. For a writer with Stephen King's imagination, it was the perfect setting for horror. The Kings were assigned room 217, the same room where Elizabeth Wilson had nearly died in the explosion 6 decades earlier. Stephen King did not know the history of the room at the time, but he would later learn it and incorporate elements of it into his work. That evening, the couple had dinner in the empty dining room, served by a skeleton staff. The experience was surreal and unsettling. They walked the deserted corridors, their footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. They peered into empty rooms and vacant ballrooms. The hotel seemed frozen in time, a monument to an era that had passed into history. That night, Stephen King had a nightmare. In his dream, he watched his young son Danny running through the corridors of the hotel, being chased by a fire hose that had somehow come alive, snaking after the boy like a malevolent serpent. King woke in a cold sweat, his heart pounding. He got out of bed and walked to the window, looking out at the mountains bathed in moonlight. In his mind, a story was taking shape, a story about a grand old hotel with a terrible past, a struggling writer and his family trapped there for the winter, and a malevolent presence that fed on human fear and weakness. By the time Stephen King left the Stanley Hotel the next morning, he had the complete outline of what would become The Shining in his mind. He would later describe the experience as one of the most powerful creative moments of his career. The hotel had spoken to him, had shown him something dark and terrible lurking beneath its elegant surface. All he had to do was write it down. The Shining was published in 1977 and immediately became one of the most acclaimed horror novels in American history. The book tells the story of Jack Torrance, a recovering alcoholic and aspiring writer who accepts a job as the winter caretaker of the Overlook Hotel, a grand old resort in the Colorado Rockies. Jack moves into the hotel with his wife Wendy and their young son Danny, who possesses a psychic ability known as the Shining. As the winter deepens and the hotel becomes isolated by snow, Jack begins to succumb to the malevolent influence of the building, which is haunted by the ghosts of its violent past. The novel explores themes of addiction, family dysfunction, isolation, and the way that dark places can amplify the darkness within us. While the Overlook Hotel in The Shining is a fictional creation, its debt to the Stanley Hotel is undeniable. The physical description of the Overlook with its white exterior and red roof mirrors the Stanley's appearance. The isolated mountain location, the vast empty corridors, the sense of a building with a life of its own, all came directly from King's experience that October night. Even specific details like room 217 found their way into the novel. King changed the room number to 237 in the book, but the connection to his actual experience is clear. The publication of The Shining transformed the Stanley Hotel from a regional curiosity into a destination for horror fans around the world. Visitors began arriving specifically because of the book, hoping to experience the same sense of supernatural unease that had inspired Stephen King. The hotel's management initially had mixed feelings about this association. The Stanley had always positioned itself as a refined, elegant destination, and the connection to a horror novel seemed somewhat at odds with that image. But as the years passed and the cultural significance of The Shining grew, the hotel came to embrace its reputation as one of the most haunted locations in America. The transformation accelerated in 1980, when director Stanley Kubrick released his film adaptation of The Shining, starring Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance. Kubrick's film would become one of the most iconic horror movies ever made, featuring images and scenes that have become permanently embedded in popular culture. Jack Nicholson's face leering through a shattered door, the twin girls standing in a corridor, the elevator doors opening to release a flood of blood, and the famous phrase, "Here's Johnny," that Nicholson improvised during filming. However, there is a significant irony in the relationship between the Stanley Hotel and Kubrick's film. Despite the fact that The Shining was directly inspired by Stephen King's stay at the Stanley, Kubrick chose not to film at the actual hotel. Instead, he used the Timberline Lodge on Mount Hood in Oregon for exterior shots and constructed elaborate sets in England for the interior scenes. The decision was partly practical, as the Stanley Hotel's Georgian colonial architecture did not match Kubrick's vision of an isolated mountain lodge, and partly artistic, as Kubrick wanted complete control over every aspect of the visual design. The result was a film that, while inspired by the Stanley Hotel, bore little visual resemblance to the actual building. Stephen King himself was famously unhappy with Kubrick's adaptation, feeling that it abandoned the psychological depth of his novel in favor of visual style. King felt that Kubrick's version of Jack Torrance was clearly unhinged from the beginning, while in the novel, Jack's descent into madness is gradual and tragic. The author also objected to the changes Kubrick made to the character of Wendy Torrance, who he felt was reduced from a strong, capable woman in the book to a weaker, more passive figure in the film. In 1997, Stephen King got his chance to present his own vision of The Shining in a television miniseries that he wrote and produced. Unlike Kubrick's film, the 1997 miniseries was actually filmed at the Stanley Hotel, bringing the story back to its original inspiration. The production spent weeks at the Stanley, and many of the hotel's most famous locations were featured prominently in the finished product. For fans of the novel, the miniseries represented a more faithful adaptation of King's vision. For the Stanley Hotel, it was a validation of their central place in the Shining mythology. The filming of the miniseries at the Stanley Hotel produced its own share of strange incidents that added to the building's supernatural reputation. Cast and crew members reported experiencing unexplained phenomena during the production. Equipment would malfunction for no apparent reason. Strange sounds were captured on audio recordings. Several members of the production claimed to have seen apparitions in the hotel's corridors. Whether these experiences were genuine supernatural encounters, or simply the result of heightened expectations in a famously haunted location, remains an open question. The Stanley Hotel's reputation as a paranormal hotspot attracted the attention of professional ghost hunters and paranormal investigators throughout the 1990s and 2000s. The hotel has been featured on numerous television programs devoted to supernatural investigation, including Ghost Hunters, Ghost Adventures, and Paranormal Lockdown. These investigations have produced various pieces of evidence that believers cite as proof of supernatural activity, including electronic voice phenomena, unexplained temperature fluctuations, and video footage of what appear to be apparitions. In 2006, the television program Ghost Hunters, featuring investigators from the Atlantic Paranormal Society, conducted an investigation at the Stanley Hotel. During their investigation, the team captured what they claimed was one of the most compelling pieces of evidence in the show's history. A table in one of the hotel's rooms appeared to move by itself while being recorded on multiple cameras simultaneously. The incident generated significant attention and brought a new wave of paranormal enthusiasts to the Stanley Hotel. The hotel's management has embraced the supernatural reputation while maintaining a sense of humor and perspective about it. The Stanley offers regular ghost tour, allowing visitors to explore the most haunted locations in the building while learning about the history and legends associated with each area. During the Halloween season, the hotel hosts special events including costume parties, horror movie screenings, and overnight ghost hunts. Guests can request to stay in room 217 or other reputedly haunted rooms, though these accommodations often book up months in advance. One of the most unusual services offered by the Stanley Hotel is the opportunity to participate in formal paranormal investigations. For a fee, guests can join experienced investigators for an evening of ghost hunting using professional equipment including electromagnetic field detectors, infrared cameras, and digital voice recorders. These investigations take place after regular hotel hours, giving participants access to areas of the building that are normally off-limits. The investigations are popular with both serious paranormal researchers and casual tourists looking for a unique experience. The Stanley Hotel has also become an important venue for the horror film community. The Stanley Film Festival, launched in 2013, was a celebration of horror cinema that brought filmmakers, actors, and fans to the hotel for several years. The festival featured screenings of classic horror films, premieres of new independent horror productions, and panel discussions with some of the most important figures in the genre. The setting provided an appropriately atmospheric backdrop for a celebration of cinematic terror. The connection between the Stanley Hotel and The Shining continues to be the main draw for many visitors. The hotel maintains this connection in numerous ways. The Shining is played on a continuous loop on one of the hotel's television channels, allowing guests to watch the film in the very location that inspired it. The gift shop sells a wide variety of Shining-related merchandise. The hotel has even named some of its amenities after elements of the story, including the Shining Ball, an annual formal event held in the MacGregor Ballroom. In recent years, the Stanley Hotel has undergone significant renovations and expansions while carefully maintaining its historic character. The hotel was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1977, recognizing its architectural and historical significance. A new concert hall was constructed on the property, providing a venue for live performances and events. Additional lodging buildings have been added to accommodate the growing number of visitors while preserving the original structure's integrity. The psychological question of why haunted places hold such fascination for human beings is one that scholars have debated for centuries. Some researchers suggest that belief in ghosts reflects a deep-seated human need to believe that consciousness survives death, that our existence does not simply end when our bodies fail. Others argue that haunted places serve as repositories for cultural memory, allowing us to maintain connections with the past through stories of spirits who refuse to depart. Still others take a more skeptical view, suggesting that reported supernatural experiences can be explained by psychological factors including suggestion, pareidolia, and the power of expectation. The Stanley Hotel exists at the intersection of these competing explanations. Its documented history provides a foundation for the ghost stories, lending them an air of authenticity that purely fictional narratives cannot achieve. Elizabeth Wilson really did nearly die in room 217. F.O. and Flora Stanley really did love this hotel with an intense devotion. The building really has stood in these mountains for more than a century, absorbing the experiences of countless guests and staff members. Whether or not actual ghosts walk its corridors, the Stanley Hotel is undeniably a place where history feels present, where the past seems to press against the thin membrane of the present moment. The story of Stephen King's fateful visit in 1974 illustrates the complex relationship between place and creativity. King arrived at the Stanley Hotel at a particularly vulnerable moment in his life. He was struggling with alcohol addiction, a battle he has written about openly in his memoir on writing and in numerous interviews. His career as a writer was promising but not yet secure. The financial pressures on his family were significant. In that state of creative and personal turmoil, he encountered a building that seemed to embody many of his deepest fears. Isolation, the seductive power of addiction, the potential for a good man to become something monstrous, and the vulnerability of those we love to forces beyond our control. The Shining can be read as an exploration of all these fears, filtered through the lens of supernatural horror. Jack Torrance is in many ways a portrait of what Stephen King feared he might become, a talented man destroyed by his demons, who ultimately turns that destruction outward against his family. The Overlook Hotel serves as a physical manifestation of addiction itself, seductive and luxurious on the surface, but concealing something corrupt and deadly at its core. The fact that this metaphor was born in a real place, during a real night of unease and nightmares, gives both the novel and the hotel a resonance that purely imaginary creations cannot achieve. Today, the Stanley Hotel welcomes approximately 500,000 visitors each year. They come for many reasons: to see the magnificent architecture, to enjoy the beauty of Rocky Mountain National Park, to attend concerts and events, to experience the ghost tour and paranormal investigations. But underlying all these motivations is the knowledge that this is the place where one of the greatest horror stories ever told was conceived. Standing in the lobby of the Stanley Hotel, walking its corridors, peering into its empty rooms, visitors are retracing the steps that Stephen King took on that cold October night nearly 50 years ago. They are seeking the same frisson of fear, the same sense of something lurking just beyond the edge of perception. The question of whether the Stanley Hotel is actually haunted may never be definitively answered. Science has yet to develop reliable tools for measuring supernatural phenomena, and the evidence collected by paranormal investigators remains controversial. Skeptics dismiss the ghost stories as the product of suggestion and imagination, while believers point to the thousands of reported experiences that cannot easily be explained by conventional means. The truth, as is often the case, may lie somewhere between these extremes. What cannot be disputed is the powerful atmosphere of the Stanley Hotel, an atmosphere that has remained remarkably consistent across more than a century of operation. There is something about this building, something that transcends its impressive architecture and beautiful setting. Whether that something is genuinely supernatural or simply the accumulated weight of history and story and expectation, each visitor must decide for themselves. F.O. Stanley built this hotel as a monument to life. Diagnosed with a terminal illness, he refused to surrender to death. Instead, he created something that would outlive him by generations, a testament to human ingenuity and determination. The irony that his creation has become famous as one of the most haunted locations in America would perhaps amuse him, or perhaps not. Perhaps F.O. Stanley understood something that his guests are still discovering, that death and life are not opposites, but rather two aspects of the same eternal cycle. Perhaps he built the Stanley Hotel knowing that its walls would contain more than just memories, that the spirits of those who loved it would find ways to remain. On any given night, guests at the Stanley Hotel may hear piano music drifting through empty corridors, may feel the presence of someone standing in a darkened doorway, may wake to find their belongings mysteriously rearranged. They may glimpse a figure in old-fashioned clothing walking through the gardens, or hear children's laughter echoing from somewhere above. These experiences have been reported by thousands of visitors over more than a century, and they continue to be reported today with remarkable consistency. The dark story of the Stanley Hotel is ultimately a story about the persistence of the past, about the way that buildings can absorb the experiences and emotions of those who inhabit them, about the thin boundary between imagination and reality. It is a story about a dying man who refused to die, about a writer who transformed his nightmares into art, about a grand old hotel that has become something more than the sum of its bricks and timbers. Standing in the Colorado Rockies as it has stood for more than 100 years, the Stanley Hotel continues to wait for its next guests, ready to share its secrets with anyone brave enough to spend the night. And somewhere in the music room, if you listen carefully, you might just hear the faint sound of a piano playing in the darkness, continuing a concert that began more than a century ago and shows no signs of ending anytime soon.